Dyclif Dygest. We've got a long list of topics to get into today. Actually, not even a long list of topics, just a short list of topics with a lot to cover within them. So let's go ahead and get started with the first story of the day. And we're going to be following up on Thabo Sefolosha's current situation. He has pled not guilty and has successfully pleaded not guilty, I might add. And now he is suing the NYPD for $50 million for his troubles. And rightfully so. Because it's hard to say, how much money he could actually potentially miss out on. Like the injury to his knee made it to where maybe he can't jump as high, maybe he can't do as many things as he previously was capable of doing athletically. So, if theoretically, if this did affect him in some way athletically and his primary job is focused on athletics, then he should be reimbursed for some of his lack of ability. So, go Thabo, suing the NYPD for $50 million. Hopefully he gets it, and people might sit back and say, well, he already makes a ton of money. Why does he need $50 million? Well, it's compensation. Like, he was in a prime position to possibly reach the NBA Finals. And you could say what you want about the Atlanta Hawks and the Cavs last year, but just in my personal opinion alone, the Hawks would have increased their chances tenfold if Thabo Sefolosha was on the court instead of someone else. That's all I'm saying. He needs to be reimbursed for what happened. I saw the video. If you want to see the video, I'm sure you can Google it or something like that and you'll find it. But definitely watch it. I didn't see any wrongdoing from Thabo Sefolosha in it necessarily. Just night on the town, randomly gets attacked by police officers. I don't exactly know what to make of it, to be honest with you. So now we're moving on to the next topic, and this is going to be a complete breakdown of the NBA season. So buckle up and get ready. If you do not want to go over all 30 teams in the NBA, you can skip ahead, but I will promise you there's going to be some interesting stuff brought up in this video. First off, let's talk about the Atlanta Hawks, since they are first alphabetically by geography, that is, Atlanta. So their projected starting lineup is Jeff Teague, Tim Hardaway Jr., Kyle Korver, Paul Millsap, and Al Horford. I don't know exactly if that'll change. I'm pretty sure it will over the course of the season. The Hawks, I expect them to be top 4 in the East simply because, when you have Paul Millsap and Al Horford together in the front court working together, it really doesn't matter what team in the Eastern Conference they're playing for. They're going to make the playoffs with that front court. You can basically put anybody around them and it doesn't matter. But Jeff Teague, pretty good all-around point guard. You got to give it to the guy. So ultimately, I see at least a top 4 finish, if not, maybe even second. Pretty much the same as last year. It's kind of hard to gauge the Hawks because they had such a good season last year. But one area they really are going to hurt in this year is losing DeMarre Carroll. I don't know how they're going to be able to cope with that because he was a great defender at the small forward position. Again, Thabo's still going to be there, but his status still remains somewhat questionable. He's in preseason, he seems to be playing all right, but you really can't tell a whole lot by preseason. So ultimately, the Hawks may be upwards of 54, 55 wins this season. That's really about all that I see. I don't see much more. Don't really see much less because of the competition that's in the East. So moving on, let's go to the Boston Celtics. I personally believe this team can make the playoffs, but there's going to be some competition this year to do so. So this is going to be very interesting. Now, the Celtics have a very confusing roster when it comes down to who the starting five is and what they're going to make of the roster. Like, they have about 10 guys, 11, 12 maybe, that could be in a rotation. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. If you really take into consideration team basketball, the Celtics are up there. Their projected starting lineup right now, and this, I don't even think this is going to be it, personally. According to this site, it is Avery Bradley, Marcus Smart, Evan Turner, David Lee, and Tyler Zeller. Now, personally, I see Isaiah Thomas possibly getting the start this year. But in some ways, I think he's better off the bench simply because he just has a different spark. He provides a different element off the bench that isn't normally there. And the Celtics like to start out with a good defensive side, Avery Bradley, Marcus Smart being, two lockdown defenders for their positions, and Isaiah Thomas being more of a scorer, although he can play a bit of defense. I really see Amir Johnson starting center over Tyler Zeller, though, simply because of the shot-blocking presence and rebounding. David Lee, I'm not quite sure if he starts because of Jared Sullinger. This roster is just completely stacked when you get down to it. I mean, you have R.J. Hunter, who's new, Jay Crowder, who is definitely an improved player. They recently signed Perry Jones from free agency. Just Kelly Olynyk, another big man that can shoot. They just have a number of different weapons, and I'm not really sure what to expect from the Boston Celtics this season. So I'm just going to put them at 44 wins, 45. Maybe they get the 7th or 8th seed in the East. I'm not quite sure. I wouldn't bet on it either way. I'm not even sure what exactly could happen out of that, but let's move on to the Brooklyn Nets. What a up and down team this has been over the past few years. They went all out to win a championship, and they kind of busted on that one. They tried to move and get Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, but to no avail. Their current roster looks like this: Jarrett Jack, Joe Johnson, Bogdanovich, Thaddeus Young, and Lopez, which isn't too bad, but I still don't see this team making the playoffs with their current roster. They recently signed Andrea Bargnani. They do have Rondé Hollis Jefferson, and just a number of different cast members that I'm not quite sure if they're going to be able to coexist peacefully as a unit. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. So ultimately, I don't see the Brooklyn Nets making the playoffs anytime soon. They lost Darren Williams, I should say. I was looking at Joe Johnson's name and kind of put Darren Johnson together for some reason. But losing Darren Williams to the Dallas Mavericks didn't necessarily help, but I think that could revitalize his career once we get to talking about the Mavericks, that is. So, I'm going to say 33 wins for the Brooklyn Nets, 32, something like that. Again, not an expert, just an opinion. Next, we have the Charlotte Hornets, and this is going to be an interesting team this season. Their projected starting lineup is Kemba Walker, Nicholas Batum, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Frank Kaminsky, and Al Jefferson. Now I don't know if we all know, but if you haven't heard, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist is currently injured, and I'm not sure on his timetable for return. So we'll question that starting lineup, especially Kaminsky, too, being a rookie, but he is 7 foot tall. I don't know how he's going to fit in with Al Jefferson. That's going to be something to look out for. They do have Cody Zeller, Jeremy Lin, who's been sort of a catalyst off the bench in preseason. Jeremy Lamb, Spencer Hawes, PJ Harrison, Tyler Hansborough, Aaron Harrison, who was undrafted, by the way. and has actually made an NBA roster. So this team, I don't see an NBA playoff berth from them quite yet. I still think there's room for improvement in some areas. Their bench, I don't feel like is strong enough to complement the starters in time of need when the starters would need rest. So that's definitely something to take into consideration when you look at this roster and you're looking at potential teams to make the playoffs. I don't see the Charlotte Hornets getting necessarily close to the playoffs, but Al Jefferson, I do see a big year out of him because of the touches that he's going to get. And also another thing to take into consideration, Noah Vonleh is no longer on the roster. I know that some people were looking forward to that. Like, they had, at one point on their roster, they had Noah Vonleh, Frank Kaminsky, and Cody Zeller, all of which come from the Big Ten. They're all power forwards or centers from the Big Ten Conference. And like, this happened over a span of 3 years. I seriously believe it was 3 players in 3 years they drafted from the same conference. I don't quite understand that, but I guess they have to go after Frank Kaminsky. That's really the only way. But I'm going to put the Charlotte Hornets at about 35 wins this season, 34, 35. We'll see what happens. Next, we have the Chicago Bulls, and this is one of those teams where you don't know really what to expect. This could be upwards of a 57-win season or maybe even 46. Who really knows? But they have the starting lineup as Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler, Mike Dunleavy, Pau Gasol, and Joakim Noah. And, I'm not really going to disagree with that. Let's talk a little bit about Derrick Rose. It's been a brutal last couple of years for Derrick Rose, and that's an understatement to say the least. What I'm looking for this year out of Derrick Rose is a smarter game. I still want him to play fast and athletically, but just not to a level to where he's going to get hurt, because the guy right now seems fragile as glass. I don't know what it is, but I think if he just plays in a smarter way, maybe takes a more traditional approach to the point guard role, we'll see what happens. The Bulls don't necessarily need to look for him to score anymore when they have Jimmy Butler, who has been an increasingly great offensive star. You have Pau Gasol, who's going out of his way to make sure that he gets his own down low. You have Joakim Noah, who's playing an all-around role. Maybe could improve on the offensive end still. Mike Dunleavy, who's knocking down shots. You still have Taj Gibson off the bench. Doug McDermott, who is going to be looking to step it up this season. Kirk Hinrich as a backup to Derrick Rose. Captain Kirk. You have Bobby Portis, who is a new rookie, who I think is that kind of blue-collar player that they've been missing. You have Mirotic, who has been great. He was up there for Rookie of the Year, technically, even though I believe he's in his high 20s still. But either way, I think they have a decent roster. It could potentially be a championship roster if Derrick Rose gets back to his former glory. I'm going to say 53 wins out of this team this season. I don't see a reason why they necessarily wouldn't get any more. Even if Derrick Rose goes down, they have options. They have Kirk Hinrich, who I believe is a great floor general. And, they have a new head coach as well. And, I'm not so sure how that's going to work out for them. Firing Tom Thibodeau like that was a rough one for me. Personally, I didn't like the firing, but in a way, I guess you can say that they needed a more tactile approach in head coaching instead of just a defensive-minded coach that would just send his message across. They needed someone that actually drew up plays and really took into consideration everything at their disposal. So, I'm not going to blame them for making that decision, but all in all, I expect a decent season out of the Chicago Bulls. Next, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers, NBA Finals bound last year. And this season, they have collectively the same unit, everyone healthy at the moment. And it should be very interesting to see what happens this season. Their projected starting lineup is Kyrie Irving, Amon Shumpert, LeBron James, Kevin Love, and Anderson Varejao. Now, there's a few ways this could go. You can move LeBron to power forward, Kevin Love to center, and play small ball. And really, you can input J.R. Smith when and where you want, and really just move around these players to your liking. So basically, what everyone needs to understand right now is the Cavs are kind of loaded when it comes to their bench. They have re-signed Tristan Thompson to a massive deal, and to whether or not he deserves a contract or not, I'll get to maybe at a later date. But when you have Mo Williams, a recent acquisition, who's played for the Cavs before, who's had chemistry with LeBron, who's played in this league for a while, he's a veteran, I would consider him. I think he's going to fit in nicely as a backup guard. Matthew Dellavedova, we all know what he did in the NBA Finals and what he's capable of on the defensive end. Richard Jefferson, not sure what he's going to be able to provide for the Cavs, but there is veteran leadership there, like James Jones. Timothy Mozgov, stepped up huge. What a mid-season acquisition it was for them last year, a trade with the Nuggets, to get Mozgov in the first place. I just think the depth that the Cavaliers have this season is unmatched in the league, possibly. Especially when it comes to their front court. You have Tristan Thompson, Kevin Love, Anderson Varejao, and Timothy Mozgov. If none of them get injured, those are quality players at those positions that you can rotate in and out all day long, and it doesn't matter. I talked about this when I was talking about the NBA Finals and if they were healthy, and I'll talk about it now, and I'll talk about it until they separate. That is collectively possibly the best front court there is in the league. When you talk about collective front court, both starting and reserve or substitution, I expect great things from the Cavs this season. I would say upwards of 59 wins, possibly getting to that 60 region. And they will be threatening and knocking on the door for an NBA championship. I do not see another team reaching the Eastern Conference Finals besides the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I've been surprised before. On to a Western Conference team. We're going in alphabetical order here, not necessarily just order of Eastern Conference alphabetical order, but it's kind of weird how that works. The first 6 teams alphabetically in terms of cities or states or just general location is in the Eastern Conference. That's kind of weird to me. But we have the Dallas Mavericks, and they're obviously in a tough conference. Their projected starting lineup right now is Deron Williams, Wesley Matthews, Chandler Parsons, Dirk, Zaza Pachulia. So what I look at here is, can this full roster compete in the Western Conference? And I say maybe. And I say maybe because they have Devin Harris, J.J. Barea, Samuel Dallenberg, Charlie Villanueva, and a few other sort of role players like Raymond Felton and Justin Anderson, who I'm going to tell you right now to look out for. This guy can play on both ends of the floor, and will be interesting to see. If you watched him play at Virginia, then you'll know what I'm talking about. And they've obviously lost Tyson Chandler, Rondo, Monte Ellis, Amari Stoudemire, which is quite a bit to lose, to be fair, but getting Deron Williams back in his hometown and signing Wesley Matthews is huge. Wesley Matthews, great two-way player, very underrated in this league. He can shoot the 3 ball. He can guard anybody 1 through 3. And I see the Dallas Mavericks on the outside looking in this year, simply because if they could have signed DeAndre Jordan, this team could have been a playoff team, but they obviously didn't. And I don't know. The Mavericks just can't seem to find that center that they're going after. They couldn't capture Dwight, and they couldn't capture DeAndre Jordan. Instead, they captured Zaza Pachulia, who, in his own way, isn't that bad, but I expect Samuel Dallenberg to be getting some quality minutes. But I will say this. This is one team that definitely needs to look at bringing in Larry Sanders if he wants to play basketball again. If you remember, the Milwaukee Bucks had a falling out with Larry Sanders. Sanders just decided he didn't want to play basketball anymore. It was plain and simple. I think if you input Larry Sanders into the Dallas Mavericks lineup, you're talking about a different team, and definitely an improved team, and maybe even a playoff team. But at their current state, I'm going to give them 37, 38 wins. I know that seems low. If they were in the Eastern Conference, that would be like 45, 46. Easy. But they're not. They're in the Western Conference. I just want to let you know I value this team and how good they are, but their record is not going to indicate that in the slightest bit. You know, I might give them 38 wins, but that's about it. That's about all I see coming out of the Dallas Mavericks this season. Now moving on to the Denver Nuggets, and this is one of the more interesting teams, and I'm going to say that a lot. Like, I don't know why. All these teams interest me to some degree, but their starting lineup projected is Emmanuel Mudiay, Randy Foye, Danilo Gallinari, Wilson Chandler, and Kenneth Faried, which I find interesting because I believe that they'll probably just take out Randy Foye, move Gallinari or Wilson Chandler to shooting guard, and the other one to small forward, put Kenneth Faried at power forward, and put Jusuf Nurkic, I believe, at center, because he's been an outstanding player, whether you believe it or not. He's just come out of nowhere from Bosnia and just decided, you know what? I'm going to start playing. That's basically what happened. But they obviously lose Ty Lawson, which I think that was, in my opinion, a decent departure because they were paying him quite a bit. Now they have open cap space. They have Mudiay to fill his role. And Mudiay interests me from China. And obviously he was a high schooler who decided to go overseas, take that route like Brandon Jennings. And it should be interesting to see how his career plays out. But he's given the keys to this offense to run wild. And, you know, he's 6'5". You know, like I see him not necessarily as a 6'5" top, 6'6" that can get rebounds and assists, you know, like Michael Carter-Williams. Maybe not the Michael Carter-Williams type, more athletic, more of a slasher. I don't know. We're just going to have to see. I see him more as that role, not necessarily a playmaker, although he probably can do that because he's a point guard, and I've watched him very briefly. I don't know too much about him, to be fair, but I'm not really sure what to expect from him. The bench is a little bit crazy, and when I say a little bit crazy, I mean foreign in some ways, because they, as I mentioned, they have Nurkic, Papanikolaou. They have Gary Harris, who I don't know what kind of season he's going to have. Maybe he steps up and becomes a starter. We have some guy named Geoffrey Lavergne from France. Nikola Jokic. Yeah, this is a rough time. I'm looking at their bench. They have two Nikolas on their team. Both from Serbia, actually. That's kind of crazy. I mean, they have Serbians, they have people from Bosnia, Greece, Italy, you name it, China, Emmanuel Mudiay. So this is just about as foreign as the San Antonio Spurs once was. This is going to be an interesting team. Definitely, if you are a person who invests in NBA League Pass, this might be one of the teams you watch simply because of how up and down they'll be. And whether or not anyone wants to admit it, they kind of have that home court advantage when it comes to being at a higher altitude. They have guys that can flat out run, and that's what I like with the Emmanuel Mudiay draft pick. And very interesting to see how they're going to use that to their advantage this season. We're just going to have to see. Next up, we have the Detroit Pistons, and I'm not expecting a huge season from them in the slightest, if I'm honest with you. I just don't see it, because their starting lineup currently projected is Reggie Jackson, Jody Meeks, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Ersan Ilyasova, and Andre Drummond. Now, they don't even have Brandon Jennings starting right now, which is interesting. And they have Stanley Johnson, who's been pretty good for Arizona. I don't know where he's going to fit in. He might even start, for all I know. A huge name on this list is Danny Granger. To whether or not what exactly is going to happen with him is to be seen. I don't see this team getting over 29 wins, if I'm honest. I don't know the future of the Detroit Pistons. Their draft picks have been kind of dodgy. When you can consider they could have drafted Justice Winslow instead of Stanley Johnson. But Stanley Johnson, I believe, was a man of Michigan, so that's why they probably went with him, a sort of a hometown hero there. I'm sorry to anybody that's a Piston fan out there. I just don't know what to exactly talk about here besides Andre Drummond and the amount of touches that he's going to get within this offense, because the Pistons have sort of lost a lot of people over the past couple of years. I mean, when you lose Tayshaun Prince, who's been sort of your veteran on the team, and you lose Greg Monroe to the Bucks, it's sort of a big deal. Like, I don't know, like 29 wins. 29 wins is what I'm going to say, and that's what I'm going to stick with. Next, we have the defending champion Golden State Warriors, and their projected starting lineup goes something like this: Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Harrison Barnes, Draymond Green, and Andrew Bogut. You don't have to say much. They currently have the most valuable player on their team. I don't know if it'll stay that way necessarily. It probably won't, because it's hard to go back-to-back MVP, especially as a point guard. So, I mean, it doesn't really need to be said what this team's capable of. They have Andre Iguodala, Maurice Spate, Sean Livingston, Festus Ezeli. The bench play is still there for them. The three-point shooting's still there for them. Draymond Green, being the X factor, is still there for them to spread the floor, play defense, agitate people defensively. Yeah. But when you take into consideration they didn't really lose anybody either, I got to give them 58 wins at least. I feel like they're that strong. It's really hard to judge like who's going to be first in the Western Conference when it's all said and done. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but really you have an MVP on your team. You have probably the second greatest three-point shooter in the league on your team, with the first on your team. That's just metaphorically speaking. Realistically, I would say Klay Thompson's a top 5 three-point shooter, because there's others that you got to take into consideration, like Kyle Korver, and a few others come to mind, like Wesley Matthews was actually pretty good last year. So, Golden State Warriors, 58 wins. Expect pretty much a relatively same season. Do not expect 67 wins out of this team. That is ridiculous to expect again. I don't think it's going to happen. So next up, interestingly enough, we have the Houston Rockets, which alphabetically it went Warriors then Rockets. And last year, if you're aware of the seeding, it went 1 and 2 Warriors and Rockets. So their projected starting lineup is Ty Lawson, James Harden, Trevor Ariza, Donatas Montejunas, and I didn't really know how to pronounce his first name that well. I just said it anyways. And then we have Dwight Howard. Pretty good all-around lineup. I expect a relatively good season out of them, as usual. Kevin McHale has got this team on the right track. The Ty Lawson pickup was huge if he can play under the right circumstances. Their bench is relatively good as well with Terrence Jones, Patrick Beverly, Corey Brewer, Sam Decker, the new draft pick. They have Chuck Hayes, Clint Capella, who gave them quality minutes in the playoffs. Should be one heck of a team to look forward to. I don't believe James Harden will win MVP. He might be top 5 again. He's going to be playing more off the ball in terms of this offense because of Ty Lawson being there. And it should be interesting to see how the Houston Rockets do. I'm going to put them at 56 wins simply because of chemistry. I don't know how Ty Lawson's going to be starting out with them and really what to expect from him. So let's give him 56 wins and we'll see what happens from there. Can the Houston Rockets win it all this year? I'm going to say maybe. I'm not going to count them out. I wouldn't bet on them winning, but I wouldn't bet on them necessarily losing either because there are things that they can do during the season to acquire more depth, and there's definitely more things they can do to open up what they want to do in terms of offense and defense. It also depends on Dwight Howard's health. It depends on James Harden and if he actually plays off the ball better in comparison. There's just so many different things that come into consideration. If Ty Lawson is at his very best, then this might be a different team. It's just hard to say, especially with some of these new acquisitions and whatnot that are being made and have been made. So next up we have the Indiana Pacers. And they lost their fair share, but they also gained their fair share, so I'm not quite sure what to expect from them. We have George Hill, Monte Ellis, Solomon Hill, Paul George, and Miles Turner. Frank Vogel has been vocal about Paul George playing power forward, and I've heard reports that Paul George is not happy about that, but you know, when you lose Roy Hibbert, who's been a man of the Pacers for a while now, and he's finally been traded to the Lakers, it's kind of interesting to see what's going to happen down low. Like their rim protector is now gone, and they need shoes to refill it. Miles Turner comes in. Didn't hear much about him in Texas. He was maybe the second or third best center coming into the league. And I say the league as in the NCAA. He was right there with Okafor and Towns in the high school projections, according to ESPN. So, not sure what to expect from him either. He's a wild card to me. Solomon Hill starting. The Pacers making the playoffs definitely is a possibility in the East. Again, big thing is Paul George's health. But I just don't think they have the bench, if I'm honest. Jordan Hill, Rodney Stuckey, Lavoy Allen, Chase Budinger, Joseph Young, the new draft pick. It is just so difficult to sit here and say this team makes the playoffs with their current roster. Like, they lost David West, Roy Hibbert, Luis Scola. I mean, I don't know how you can cope with that, to be honest with you. I'm going to put them at 37, 38 wins. And I don't know really if that's going to make the playoffs or not in the East. I think it's going to be neck and neck. Expect the Pacers to be maybe even the 9th, 8th, 7th seed of the East. I don't see anything different than that, though. So, moving on, we have the Los Angeles Clippers. And a very, very interesting offseason that they had. Their projected starting lineup right now is Chris Paul, J.J. Redick, Paul Pierce, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan. We all know what happened in the offseason with DeAndre Jordan and sort of the Mavericks holdout. He initially agreed and then decided to go back to the Los Angeles Clippers after what appeared to be some sort of a standoff situation. I don't know. It was some sort of unique situation that I've never seen before. What a day that was. The emoji battle that just broke out and everything. But the Clippers definitely have the depth that you want from a roster with Josh Smith, Jamal Crawford, and Lance Stevenson especially are the big names there. Really what they're missing, though, and this is just my opinion, is a backup big. Like, Josh Smith can kind of give you that, I guess, at power forward. He can play both small forward and power forward, whatever you like. But really, their only other center on the roster, on their initial 12-man roster, is Cole Aldridge. And I'm not so sure about that. They might need to invest in another big man moving forward. So I just don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, their bench is good. Their starters are good. I see them being a top 4 seed in the West, but I don't see them winning at all, though. Like, that's the thing. Doc Rivers, a pretty good coach. Chris Paul, one of the best point guards in the league. J.J. Redick, one of the best shooters in the league. Paul Pierce, clutch. Blake Griffin, one of the best power forwards in the league. DeAndre Jordan can give you a little bit of everything at the center position in terms of what you want out of a prototypical 21st century center. So, it's going to be an interesting season for them. I'm going to say 56 wins for the Clippers, and I'm excited to watch this team moving forward. And I believe you should know what's coming next. If you stick with the alphabet and we go with Los Angeles, then it goes to the Los Angeles Lakers. So their current starting lineup, and this is projected again, and I don't even agree with it. They have Jordan Clarkson, Kobe Bryant, Nick Young, Julius Randle, and Roy Hibbert. I'm going to go ahead and disagree with that and input D'Angelo Russell. They do not pick a guy with their second pick for no reason to put him on the bench. I don't understand that really at all. But this Lakers team is going to surprise some people. They're not going to make the playoffs. But I do firmly believe that they'll be knocking on the door. And by knocking on the door, I mean knocking on the door not with their knuckles, but by throwing paper at the door. That's how close they're going to be. So outside looking in by about 7 games or 8. I don't know how to necessarily metaphorically put that, but let's just go ahead and put it with the only way I know. I'm projecting about 34 wins from this team. So, if it's the Eastern Conference, they're pretty close to making it. But since this is the Western Conference and pretty much every single night's going to be a dogfight, I don't expect this team to make the playoffs, but they're going to be there simply because of their depth, and I'll give it to them on this. Lou Williams, huge acquisition. He knew he was going to get playing time here. Brandon Bass, former Celtic, now a Laker. I don't know how many of those actually exist. Someone should look that up. D'Angelo Russell, again, someone that can... I don't know what he's capable of in the NBA, but he's someone that can score, and Kobe can be a mentor to him in some ways. Metta World Peace is back on the roster. Interesting to see what he's going to provide. And basically, the rest is up for grabs. A lot of bench spots that are questionable. So, one thing I look for in determining sort of an NBA champion or an NBA champion caliber roster is depth. And I know I'm bringing this up with the Lakers, but forgive me. That's something that you need to have if you're going to be able to take hits during a game. If you substitute your bench in and they're able to stand their ground and not lose momentum and not lose sight of what's important in the game, then that's huge for your team. I just wanted to say that because the teams that don't have good depth, if you look at them carefully, they're not as successful. They don't make the playoffs. They're not even in the picture. And when it comes down to the playoffs and the teams that are in the playoffs, the ones with depth typically go on to win. The Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers from last year. The reason the Cavs were so good, depth. even though they got injuries, people were able to fill the shoes of Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving, and guess what? They made it to the finals, and they made it 6 games out of it. You know, it's stuff like that you need to take into consideration when picking a team long term to go far. So that's just one thing I'll mention straight off the bat. So the Lakers, I believe I said somewhere along the lines of 34 games, and I think that's to be expected. I do believe that they get more than 30, though, this season, because I think they have the grit and determination to finally do it and not tank, really. Next, we have the Memphis Grizzlies, who have seemed to be always pretty good in the past 6 years, out of nowhere. Their projected starting lineup is Mike Conley, Courtney Lee, Jeff Green, Zach Randolph, and Marc Gasol. Again, one of the best front courts in the whole league when you're talking about starting front courts. And their bench right now, new acquisition, Matt Barnes, then Tony Allen, Brandon Wright, who's a pretty interesting prospect, Andrew Harrison, Vince Carter, and sort of an old school name with Bino Udre. So, okay, again, decent depth, but not good enough to win an NBA championship, in my personal opinion. And also, they have a problem they have not addressed in the past couple years, and that's their three-point shooting percentage. They don't have a guy or multiple guys that can give you that perimeter shot. And you figured that they would have good perimeter shooters, but Courtney Lee's great. I'll give them that. But when you have Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol, who's doing work down low, and you have Mike Conley, who's setting that offense up and really being a catalyst for that team, you figured that they would play an inside-out game to where they would get wide-open three-point shots out of their offense because of the personnel that they have on the floor. So it's kind of hard for me to see how they haven't addressed this yet in free agency in the past maybe even 5 years. So that's something that they absolutely need to address if they're going to win an NBA championship. They're not far from it. I honestly say that they are not far from it. This is a team that is capable. They are just a few missing pieces away. I'm going to give them 52 wins this year because that's just how tough this conference is. It's going to be interesting to see what they're capable of. I'm saying that literally about every single team, but the Western Conference is literally a question mark in some cases because it's so hard to predict injuries and just different things that happen throughout a season that could affect it. So just look at that over the course of the long term and, just calibrate what you want out of it. But that's going to be it. We're halfway through for the preview of the 2015-16 NBA season. Let's take a break. Hello and welcome back to the Dyclif Dygest. We left off with the Memphis Grizzlies. Now we're moving on to the Miami Heat. And this is going to be another interesting team. They have Goran Dragic, Dwayne Wade, Luol Deng, Chris Bosh, and Hassan Whiteside. And I got to say, that's a pretty stacked starting lineup in the Eastern Conference. And on top of that, they have Amari Stoudemire, Mario Chalmers, Birdman, Justice Winslow, and really, the casual assistants, if you will, on the bench. So, couple things. Dragic's second season, I expect pretty good things out of him. Dwayne Wade getting a little bit older, but still performing at a high level. Luol Deng getting a little bit older, but filling the role that he needs at that small forward position. Chris Bosh had troubles last season with health, and he's better, it appears. So, should be interesting to see what he's going to be capable of. Hassan Whiteside, the reincarnation of Bill Russell randomly. We're going to see if he can keep up his play, because he came out of nowhere last year. He was basically a Jeremy Lin-esque story. And someone that I really want people to look out for is Justice Winslow. He is very capable of making it into the starting lineup towards the end of the year if Luol Deng isn't performing at his highest level, or if he gets injured. I believe Luol Deng could be replaced easily with Justice Winslow, given the right circumstance and given the right time to make the adjustment to the starting lineup. So Justice Winslow is a huge one to look out for. I feel like I'm more in tune with these rookies than usual, simply because of how much college basketball that I watch compared to everything else. So I will tell you, watch out for Justice Winslow this year. And really, the Miami Heat, I'm looking at their full roster, and I'm thinking this is a 53-win team. Like, this is a really good team. And they should not be taken lightly, especially if they can maybe make a acquisition to improve their depth even more in some areas. But really, I didn't mention Josh McRoberts either, who has been a questionable pickup for them. Last year, they picked him up before LeBron even left Miami. And, you know, he was one of those weird bigs from Charlotte that could pass, could rebound, and could give you a little bit of everything. But I'm not quite sure that I'm sold on him just yet. But we'll see what kind of season he has. Looking forward to it. Next, we have a very youthful and energetic team, the Milwaukee Bucks. Michael Carter-Williams, Chris Middleton, Jabari Parker, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Greg Monroe is their starting lineup. And some of their bench players, Grievous Vasquez, O.J. Mayo, John Henson, Jared Bayless, Chris Copeland, and a handful of others that are spread out across the board. This is very interesting to me because you could basically play Giannis anywhere and be successful. Recent acquisition of Greg Monroe can give you something underneath they didn't previously have. This Bucks team is dangerous, and I do believe they are a playoff team, easily 6th seed. I'm going to give them 46 wins on the year. I think it's that good of a year for the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, they were a 6th seed last year. You take that in consideration, and Jabari Parker actually being healthy this year, along with the acquisition of Greg Monroe. If you look at how youthful this roster is and the talent that could be, potentially grasped in the future is kind of ridiculous. And the fact they still have cap space to sign more free agents in the coming future, and they still have a promising future ahead of them. It's a scary, scary Bucks team, and I think Bucks fans should be proud of this roster they currently have and be excited for the future. Moving on, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves, who last year was very disappointing. I believe they were one of the 3 worst teams record-wise in the league. Their starting lineup looks something like this: Ricky Rubio, Kevin Martin, Andrew Wiggins, Kevin Garnett, and Karl Anthony Towns. Now, I don't know if Kevin Garnett's going to be starting because Nikolai Pekovic is there as well, and I believe that he'll start center and Towns will start power forward. This isn't a bad team necessarily, but they're young. And, Kevin Martin, he's a good guy to stretch the floor, maybe a little bit of a liability on defense, although he is 6'7" and he's been improving in recent years. They have Zach LaVine, who has been a man on a mission. And when I say that, he's basically just a high flyer, very athletic. They have Gorgie Zhang, Tyus Jones, recent draft pick, Adrian Payne, Anthony Bennett was recently traded to them. I don't see them doing that bad this year. I'm going to say around the 27 win mark. And I say that's not that bad, but, you got to take into consideration that they're playing in the Western Conference, and there's not much you can do with that exactly. So, really, just look out for this team because of their young talents. They don't make the playoffs, but, again, great team moving forward in the future. One of those future teams. The Bucks and Timberwolves back-to-back. Very, very future-oriented. Moving on, we have another kind of future-oriented team, although it's kind of right now. It's one of those teams. The New Orleans Pelicans. Will they make the playoffs again? That is a huge question, and I believe that's basically a coin flip at this point, because if you look at the teams that are ahead of them and what they had to do last year to make it, they had to top the Thunder to make it last year. And I know the Thunder didn't have Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook for a short period, but Drew Holiday, Eric Gordon, Tyreek Evans, Anthony Davis, and Omer Ashik. Bench players like Ryan Anderson, Alexis Ajinka, Pondexter, Kendrick Perkins, Luke Babbitt. Their bench, I will say, is not quite there to make a run quite yet. But their starting lineup is good, and in my opinion, they have one of the three best players in the whole league, Anthony Davis. And I don't think that's opinion anymore. I think that's a consensus. That's not a word. I don't even know what I'm getting at. It's just a consensus at this point that Anthony Davis is a top player in the league. And I don't know what to expect from him this year. We might actually see a quadruple-double this season from Anthony Davis. I'm that avid about watching him this year. So I'm going to give the New Orleans Pelicans 44 wins, and if that's good enough to make the Western Conference playoffs, then it's good enough. But if it's not, it's not. So we're just going to have to see what happens with them. Moving on, we have the New York Knicks, and this team isn't going to be as bad as everyone thinks it's going to be, and let me tell you why. Jose Calderon, Aaron Aflalo, Carmelo Anthony, Kristaps Porzingis, Robin Lopez, and a bench cast with Langston Galloway, Derek Williams, Lou Amundsen, Kyle O'Quinn, Jerian Grant, draft pick, Clay Anthony Early, draft pick in 2014. So their depth isn't quite there, but their starting lineup is pretty good when you consider Aaron Aflalo, who in my opinion is one of the 8 best two-way players in the league when it comes to the guard position. Carmelo Anthony, we all know what he's capable of. Kristaps Porzingis, we don't know what he's capable of, but maybe he transforms into something to where Phil Jackson and Derek Fisher like this guy for the triangle offense. Robin Lopez, not a bad little center there to play around with. So, you have your general core down. I think this is going to be a 31-win team this season. I think they're going to put on. This is a lot better than last year, although I will never understand why they traded Tim Hardaway Jr. away. That, in my personal opinion, was one of the dumbest decisions that the Knicks have made in the past 5 years. I just don't understand why. The Hawks got a steal with that one. I'll tell you that much. Pretty good two-way player, can shoot the three, score off the dribble. He has an exciting future ahead of him, so I don't know why they did that, but overall, Knicks, not the worst. Next, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I'm pretty excited to talk about them simply because of Scott Brooks not being there anymore. It's now Billy Donovan. You have Russell Westbrook, Dion Waiters, Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, and Inez Kanter. Bench players such as Steven Adams, Cameron Payne, DJ Augustine, Anthony Morrow, Mitch McGary, who is sort of that blue-collar replacement for Nick Collison when Nick Collison does retire. Andre Roberson, Nikari Johnson, Steve Novak, all of which you can play around with and see what you like the best off the bench. Again, depth isn't as good as the Golden State Warriors and the San Antonio Spurs, or the Los Angeles Clippers for that matter, But when you have two validated MVP candidates in your lineup, does it really matter? It will matter in the long run, but just take into consideration that this team will this is one of those teams, like, if the star goes down, then it's different. It's totally different. I'm going to predict 56 wins out of this team this year. And I think that's a safe bet simply because of pending injuries. We never know. How far they're going to go in the playoffs, I don't really know. Maybe Western Conference Finals, maybe quarterfinals, you don't know. You just don't know. But I don't think they're going to win an NBA championship because of what I mentioned earlier, their lack of depth. And I think that's going to be a huge thing this year. It's slowly becoming more and more important in the NBA because when you have cap space to work with and these big-name players are getting this huge money, is it really worth it to have that many big-name players and sort of lesser players around them, or would you rather have one main guy surrounded by a lot of quality players and then role players off the bench? Like, it's becoming that important about how these teams balance their cap space. And I'm just interested to see how Billy Donovan's going to do in the NBA personally. I've been watching the guy for years, and from Florida to Oklahoma, we'll see what happens. Next, we have the Orlando Magic. Speaking of Florida, their projected starting lineup is Elfrid Payton, Victor Oladipo, Tobias Harris, Channing Frye, and Nikola Vucevic. And I just now realized how many Nikolais there are in this league. That's kind of ridiculous. I think Nikola has replaced John as the most common name in the NBA. But they have Mario Hezonja, who obviously their recent draft pick was picked 5th overall, so they obviously have some confidence in him. Jason Smith, Evan Fournier, C.J. Watson, Aaron Gordon, who has been an athlete and a half, Shabazz Napier, Andrew Nicholson, just a few others to name a few. Interesting season this year. Are they playoff bound? Maybe, not quite. I don't know. 36, 37 wins is what I see from this team. I don't know really what else to say. Elfrid Payton, one of those really crazy guys that just come out of nowhere from Louisiana Lafayette, starts putting up numbers, doesn't shoot that well from the free throw line. Hopefully he's improved in that region. But at one point, he was considered for Rookie of the Year. So just keep that in mind when you watch the Magic this year and see how much they improve. They'll be knocking on the door for sure. Next, we have the Philadelphia 76ers, and you're about to hear a rant. So if you don't want to hear it, move along. Projected starting lineup, and I don't even know where you can start, if I'm perfectly honest with you. Isaiah Cannon, Tony Wroten, Robert Covington, Nerlens Noel, and Jahlil Okafor. Now, where do I begin here? It's obvious this team is tanking. If you haven't seen that yet, if you are in denial, then I'm pretty sure you're blind. Important bench players, to name a few. You have Carl Landry, Nick Stauskas, JP Tokoto, Joel Embiid likely out for the season again or questionable for the first half. I don't know. Scotty Wilbekin is now on a roster, which is interesting to see. Florida point guard who plays excellent defense. Gerald Wallace is there. Other than that, what are you doing? What is this team doing? I'm going to sit here, and I'm normally not picky, and I'm normally lenient when it comes to getting on these teams about what they do and stuff like that, but this is one I can't let go. You're going to sit here and tell me that your starting point guard, shooting guard, and small forward is Isaiah Cannon, Tony Wroten, and Robert Covington all of which would be a backup on every other roster. Every other roster, those 3 players would be a backup. I'm pretty sure you can go out in free agency right now and sign someone that will give you more quality minutes than those 3. I'm not knocking those 3. They're solid players. I think they're solid role players. I don't think they're starters in this league necessarily. Tony Roten, again, has been pretty good, but it's hard to say what in the world they're capable of because they're playing for the Philadelphia 76ers. Number 1, why would you draft 3 centers 3 consecutive years? They trade Drew Holiday for the 6th pick of the draft to get Nerlens Noel. I believe that's how it went down. I don't even remember anymore. That's how crazy it is. You have Joel Embiid, who they take with that pick. I believe it was the third pick, second. Again, memory is very loose with this team. And then you pick Jahlil Okafor with the 3rd pick of this year's draft. They're going after the best available player according to their opinion, but let's look at something here. Joel Embiid's not proven at all. He's had some of the most severe foot-related injuries for big men this league has ever seen. Nerlens Noel has panned out quite nicely for the Philadelphia 76ers, if I'm fair. He's exactly what you want from what you drafted him. You drafted him to be a rim protector, give you the occasional offense, play great on-ball defense on whoever he's on, and pretty good post defense. That's what you want out of Nerlens Noel. Now you draft Jahlil Okafor because you're excited that he's going to give you a low post presence and really just be that low post scorer. And I guess you can say a very 1980s oriented center, someone that can just score. So I kind of see what they're doing, but at the same time I don't. I've spent way too much time talking about the Philadelphia 76ers. I'm moving on. Next, let's talk about a team that actually might do something this season, and that is the Phoenix Suns. They have Eric Bledsoe, Brandon Knight, P.J. Tucker, Markieff Morris, and Tyson Chandler, with acquisitions such as Devin Booker and people that's been on the roster like Alex Len. Teletovic is new, Ronnie Price, T.J. Warren, Archie Goodwin, all of which seem like pretty decent bench players to me. So here's what I see from this. They have 4 Kentucky players in this team, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. Markieff Morris has said that he wants it out because his brother got traded, didn't like how that was handled. Understandable, I guess. Booker, people have been comparing him to Klay Thompson. I obviously see that. Booker, though, about the same size, can shoot the ball extremely well for his position, just about top of his class. Defense is probably a little bit underrated. I think that's something at Kentucky that he really learned how to do more proficiently, and I think we're going to see it here. Tyson Chandler, I think that's a pretty decent acquisition for the Suns. Again, that's kind of a risk to take because that's another free agent you might miss out on next season, and you have Alex Len, who you'd kind of like to develop, but at the same time, they're trying to stay competitive. I get that. I'm going to say Phoenix gets off with 39 wins, and I didn't say how many wins the 76ers would have, so I'm going to go ahead and say that now. Let's just go with 19. I don't know what to say, but yeah, 39 for the Phoenix Suns. It's going to be a rough one. I don't think they recapture that former glory they had with Isaiah Thomas and Goran Dragic when they were first starting out there, and then chemistry started to get off when they included Brandon Knight and Eric Bledsoe, and craziness just ensued. So moving on, let's go to the Portland Trailblazers. And their starting lineup looks something along the lines of Damian Lillard, Gerald Henderson, Al-Farouq Aminu, Mason Plumlee, and Chris Kaman. Their bench players consist of Ed Davis, Myers Leonard, C.J. McCollum, Noah Vonleh, Brendan Haywood, Pat Connaughton, who's an interesting pick via trade. And they lost LaMarcus Aldridge, Wesley Matthews, Robin Lopez, Aaron Aflalo, Steve Blake, Darrell Wright. I mean, they're not going to recover from this season. Like, this is going to be a rebuilding year for the Portland Trailblazers, I'm sorry to say. Honestly, I believe they'll be one of the top 3 worst teams in the West, because Damian Lillard, I'll say this much, he might average 30 a game. With this roster, he's going to be taking the shots. He's going to be calling the shots, taking the shots. He is the shot. So, just absolutely ridiculous. We're going to see in fantasy. Well, from a fantasy aspect, Damian Lillard might have to be selected if you get him in a good round, that is. But Portland, honestly, I see about 24 wins out of them. I don't see much more because, again, very tough conference, and they lost 4 of their 5 starters. That's kind of ridiculous. Once LaMarcus Aldridge left, the others just went right with them and went out the door. So they followed suit, and that's all there is to it. Next, we have the Sacramento Kings. Their lineup goes something like Rajon Rondo, Ben McLemore, Rudy Gay, Willie Cauley-Stein, and DeMarcus Cousins. And players like Darren Collison, Costa Koufos, Marco Bellinelli, new acquisition, David Stockton, Caron Butler, James Anderson, who's going to be pretty interesting, Seth Curry, and that's about it in terms of players that I would look out for myself. But this team probably won't make the playoffs, let's be fair. George Karl, new coach. Now, there's been talk with Rajon Rondo and George Karl not getting along, and Boogie Cousins not necessarily getting along, but here's the thing. I've been a long-time supporter of George Karl, and I've also been a long-time supporter of Rajon Rondo and DeMarcus Cousins. With that said, I believe it's going to take time, but with effort on both ends, this team can coexist peacefully with each other. We have 3 Kentucky players in the starting lineup alone, if that starting lineup holds. So, I think chemistry is there to a certain extent. And with the right offense implemented, I believe this team can be successful. I'm going to give them 32 wins in the Western Conference. Sacramento Kings might be an interesting team to watch this year. Who knows? Next, we have the San Antonio Spurs. And my goodness. Tony Parker, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Tim Duncan is the starting lineup, with bench players like David West, Manu Ginobili, Boris Diaw, Ray McCollum, Patty Mills, Kyle Anderson, Matt Bonner, Jimmer Fredette, which he may or may not be on the roster when this is released. I don't know if he's going to be cut or not. That still remains to be seen. But what a team. What a team. The depth is there. The starting lineup is there. They have 3 possible all-stars in their starting lineup. Like, Kawhi Leonard has not been an all-star yet. I don't know. I kind of know how that's possible. But if he stays healthy, he's an all-star this year. LaMarcus Aldridge, we all know what he's capable of. He'll give you 20-10, nearly. 22-9, roughly. Tim Duncan, there's going to be nights where he gets rest. And I predicted that LaMarcus would go here for a couple of reasons. First one being he went to college at Texas. San Antonio's in Texas. Number 2, he can learn a little bit from Tim Duncan. Number 3, he can take Tim Duncan's minutes and really be the face of this franchise, not only when Tim Duncan retires, but right now. He can slip right in and be the main guy and be the focus point of the Spurs offense. So I believe that you can't turn this down. So that's why I said LaMarcus would go here. I'm going to predict 55 wins from the Spurs in the regular season simply because of rest. If it came down to it, and if there was no NBA Finals or anything like that, and it was just regular season, all-out brawl, whoever has the most wins the championship, theoretically. I believe the Spurs might be a 64-win team. That's how ridiculous they are. And they're actually my preseason pick to win the NBA championship. So I have the Spurs and the Cavs in the finals and the Spurs winning it. Really just because of their depth and experience. Those are two things that they have an advantage in that, quite frankly, no other team really can compare with. So that's why I have the Spurs winning it all. Next, we have the Toronto Raptors. And this is one of those teams that will more than likely make the playoffs in the East, but we're just going to have to see. Their projected starting lineup is Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, DeMarre Carroll, Patrick Patterson, and Jonas Valanciunas. And it just now hit me that DeMar DeRozan and DeMarre Carroll have very similar first names. If you just add an R.E. to DeMarre Carroll, then, or if you add an R.E. to DeMar DeRozan's name, you have basically the same person. So they have bench players like Luis Scola, Terrence Ross, Corey Joseph, Bismack Biyombo, Lucas Nagaria, which should be interesting to see his development, Bruno Caboclo, those crazy guys that you saw at the draft. Yeah, those guys. But they recently lost Amir Johnson, Lou Williams, and Tyler Hansborough. So realistically, I don't know how good this team's going to be. I'm going to give them 49 wins on the year, and I believe that they'll win the Atlantic Division. And their starting lineup is really good. You have Kyle Lowry, who is slimming down, becoming more fit. DeMar DeRozan, athletically ridiculous. DeMarre Carroll, we all know what he did with Atlanta last year and his defensive ability. Patrick Patterson, we know how he can spread the floor and give you an all-around game. I like Patrick Patterson's game. And Jonas Valanciunas, give you that low-post scoring, low-post defense. Kind of average, but, gets the job done. So this roster, in terms of the starting lineup, is pretty good. Depth, not exactly there to make a long playoff run. But I'll give them 49 wins, possibly up to 51, It just kind of depends. So expect a solid season for the Raptors. Expect them to make the second round of the playoffs. Maybe more, maybe the Eastern Conference Finals, but that's about it. I don't see them going any farther than that. Next, we have the Utah Jazz, and their lineup goes a little bit like this. Trey Burke, Alec Burks, Gordon Hayward, Derek Favors, and Rudy Gobert. And it almost sounded like I was making a mixtape there with how that sounded for just a half second. Their bench consists of Trey Lyles, Trevor Booker, Rodney Hood, Dante Exum, who went down with an injury earlier this year playing for Australia. I think it was an ACL-related injury. And that is about it in terms of effectiveness. I'm going to give this team a grand total of 26 wins. This is a make-or-break year for Trey Burke, Alec Burks. Gordon Hayward's already proved that he can play. I would love to see him in a Boston Celtics uniform myself. Derek Favors and Rudy Gobert, very interesting front court combination. I'm expecting decent things out of this team. I don't see them necessarily achieving too much, though, in the Western Conference, as I've said before. And last but not least, the 30th team we've covered. And my gosh, we still have a lot to go on this podcast. But the Washington Wizards, their starting lineup looks a little something like this. John Wall, Bradley Beal, Kelly Oubre Jr., Nene, and Marcin Gortat at center. Their bench, Jared Dudley, Chris Humphries, Gary Neal, Drew Gooden, Otto Porter, Ramon Sessions, DeJuan Blair as well. A pretty good overall bench, if I do say so myself. They lost Paul Pierce, obviously. But, they went with Otto Porter with the third pick, put trust in him. He hasn't necessarily panned out yet. They go with Kelly Oubre. And the Hawks originally picked Kelly Oubre, and he was traded to the Wizards during the draft. So, I'm not sure what to really expect from the Wizards this year either. I'm going to give them 49 wins, just like the Raptors. I think they're a very similar team, like the Raptors. Give them the 4 or 5 seed and let them battle it out. It's that simple. Let them battle out. Let them play the number 1 overall seed and see what happens. So, John Wall, I see an improvement from this season. I think he taps into that MVP territory in terms of how valuable he is to his team. I'm not saying he's the most valuable player in the league, but I think he truly taps into that different element. Bradley Beal steps it up a notch. Marcin Gortat has been a machine. Nene has been pretty complimentary as a power forward the past 7 years of his career. And that small forward spot for the Washington Wizards is up for grabs. Whoever wants to pursue a real direction, whether it be Otto Porter or Kelly Oubre, needs to step up and do it because this team desperately needs it. So, 49 wins. That's what I would expect from the Washington Wizards. And that has been my 2015 to 16 NBA season preview. I'm going to take a short break, and we'll be back with NFL talk. Hello, and welcome back to the Dyclif Dygest. Let's go ahead and dive right into NFL Week 7. I'm not going to talk about the Thursday night game because obviously that's already happened. But let's talk about Buffalo at Jacksonville. And I'm going to start talking about these teams in terms of the lines of games. And if you don't know what that is, basically, for example, Buffalo is -4 at Jacksonville. Technically, it's a London game, but technically it's at Jacksonville. And Jacksonville is +4. So what that means is Buffalo is favored by 4 points and Jacksonville is given 4 points from a betting perspective. So I'm going to say Buffalo wins this game. They have been somewhat disappointing the last couple weeks, and especially with LaShawn McCoy, Carlos Williams being out, it's been rough for them to get a running game established. Their quarterback, Tyrod Taylor, has been unhealthy, and Sammy Watkins has been unhappy. And their defense, quite frankly, has suffered because their offense hasn't been as good. But I think it completely changes this week against Jacksonville, and they end up getting the win. I'm not going to give necessarily a score prediction, but I would take the Bills in a betting standpoint here with -4. I believe they'll get the job done in London. Next, we have Cleveland at St. Louis, and St. Louis is favored by 6.5 points. And I'm going to say Cleveland puts up a good fight, but St. Louis still wins this game because they're at home. It's in St. Louis. I don't really see Cleveland's magic sticking with them. I think St. Louis is a really good overall team, and they've showed it this year, and they're going to show it against Cleveland. I would not take the 6.5. If you're going to bet on this game and you have to, I'll take Cleveland. simply because it's 6.5. I personally would stay away from it, but if you're going to take one way or the other, I'd take Cleveland's side because of how much they can threaten with that. And, a 2 field goal win from St. Louis kind of sounds right. Any more than that, sounds like you're playing a little crazy game that you shouldn't be playing. So, next we have Pittsburgh at Kansas City. And Pittsburgh might be without Ben Roethlisberger and Mike Vick, whereas Kansas City is obviously without Jamal Charles. And this one is close on paper, technically, but Pittsburgh is favored by 2.5 points. I would definitely take Pittsburgh here. Their defense, I believe, is better than Kansas City's defense. Kansas City's offense has just been abysmal without Jamal Charles. Like, you finally realize just how valuable he is to Kansas City until he's gone. Like, I would take Pittsburgh in a heartbeat here with the 2.5 spread. I don't see how they don't cover that, to be honest with you. Pittsburgh has been able to perform at an extremely high level without Big Ben. I think they keep it up even with their current quarterback situation. But we'll see what happens. We have Houston at Miami. Miami is favored by 4.5. This is a game I'm staying away from simply because Houston put on a crazy amount of pressure against Jacksonville last week, where I didn't necessarily expect that. I thought Houston was a lot worse than that. Then they come out and really put a pounding on Jacksonville for the first half of the game at least. And now Miami is sort of a revitalized team, and you have Houston, who's had an uplifting in the recent weeks. So, I'm staying away from it. But I still have Miami winning this game, though, by a field goal, if I had to guess. Next, we have the New York Jets at New England. And New England is favored by 8.5 points. Again, when it's close to home and it's in division, people want to give New England their best game. If you look at Buffalo, that was a relatively close game. And if you look at last week against the Colts, even though it was a one-score game towards the end, it was really a two-score game throughout the whole game. So this one I would stay away from as well, but I got the Patriots winning this one. But the New York Jets, I will mention this. Very solid team, offense and defense. They have weapons on offense at all points. Ryan Fitzpatrick has had a good showing with the Jets this season, and I expect a closer game than 8.5 points, to be honest with you. Next, we have Minnesota at Detroit, and Minnesota is favored by 2 points. This one, again, staying away from it myself, but if I had to guess, Minnesota will probably win this game. And it's kind of been weird. Like, the list I'm looking at right now, every single team that's been on the left-hand side of the screen I've favored. I don't know if that's necessarily, if they have it like that for a reason, but either way, I think Minnesota has been playing better than Detroit, but then again, Detroit might be hungry for another win, and this might be the time to do it, so staying away from it, but if I had to guess, Minnesota will probably win this game. Next, we have Atlanta at Tennessee. Atlanta's favored by 5 points. If everything goes as planned, I think Atlanta wins this game by at least 12 points. I see a double-digit win from Atlanta, but it's hard to say what Tennessee's capable of. Marcus Mariota, week 1, he looked pretty good, actually sensationally good, and then it sort of just stagnated and started to drop off. So I'm not really sure what to expect from Tennessee. Tennessee is one of those teams that has sort of a below-average offense and a below-average defense, but not by much. And it can fluctuate week to week, so it's hard to expect, or it's hard to get a grasp of what to expect with the Titans in that regard. But I still take Atlanta in this game. Next, we have the Buccaneers at the Washington Redskins. And Washington is favored by 3.5 points. And this game I'm going to stay away from altogether. Since it's at Washington, I'm going to favor Washington in this one. I believe they get the win, but not by much. This could be one of the closest games all year. I'm going to be willing to say this game is won by a single point. Maybe it's due to maybe missing an extra point or something, but it's going to be that close. So 1 or 2 points is what I'm going to say there. Next we have the New Orleans Saints at Indianapolis, and the Colts are favored by 4.5 points in this one. It's another one of those games where it's hard to say what's going to happen. This week is not very good if you're wanting to predict the line of a game simply because of how many close games it appears it's going to be. So it might be an exciting week to watch football, but not necessarily bet on it. But I'm going to say the Colts win this one because they basically have to get a win. They absolutely have to. But I don't know about the -4. They are favored, but again, it might be another close game for all I know. But I'm going to say the Colts win the game. Next, we have Oakland at San Diego, and San Diego's only favored by 4 points. And I say that because of this statistic and this statistic alone. Oakland is giving up more points in terms of fantasy to opposing tight ends than really anybody else in the league. Like, they are among the league's worst third. So when you take into consideration that Antonio Gates, if he plays, he is questionable. This is going to be ridiculous. This is sort of a battle for LA in a way, because these two teams have been rumored to move to Los Angeles along with St. Louis. So I'm going to say take San Diego's -4 and run with it. Run with it. I'm going to say this is a double-digit win for San Diego. They're a better team than what they've displayed so far. Phillip Rivers has been outstanding. Previously against Green Bay, had 503 yards. 503 yards in one game. He had to put up points because Rodgers was going to do the same. But I'm taking San Diego in this one, and I'm not going back on it ever. Next, we have Dallas at the New York Giants, and the Giants are actually favored by 3.5 points. The Giants looked like a solid team up until they played the Philadelphia Eagles, and then it kind of went downhill, and now they're playing Dallas, who might have Dez back. It's talked about. Whether he plays or not, I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen with this game. The Giants are favored by 3.5. If I had to pick a winner, I'm going with the New York Giants simply because they're at home and they don't really have anybody injured to my knowledge at the current moment. In terms of major fantasy players, that is, or major players on the team. I mean, Eli Manning's still healthy. Odell Beckham was questionable for last game, but still played. I think he's going to be better now, and he's going to play a better role in this game. I believe their offense and defense are about on the same level. I believe the Giants are one of those teams where I said earlier that the Titans were a below-average offense and defense. I think the New York Giants are just slightly above average in offense and defense, and that kind of plays to their favor sometimes. So I'm going to take the Giants in this game, and that's about it. Finally, for the Sunday games, we have Philadelphia at Carolina, and Carolina is favored by 3 points, and I'm taking those 3 points, and Carolina is going to win this game simply because Philadelphia is too turnover prone for Carolina not to take advantage of it. The Carolina Panthers have been one of the best defenses in the league statistically and just by eye. If you play it by eye, they are insanely good as well. You take whoever you want at starting quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're going to turn the ball over against Carolina. You take DeMarco Murray, who's been a bit shifty at times. Dare I say, well, no, I don't say a bit shady because that's LaShawn McCoy, but he hasn't been performing as well, but recently he has. But you go up against the Carolina defense with Luke Kuechly. I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure about these 3 points. Like, you're telling me that Carolina is only favored by 3. I highly doubt it. This might be a double-digit win for Carolina. Pretty easily, matter of fact. So, I'm taking Carolina in this game by a pretty big margin, to be honest. Next, we have Baltimore at Arizona, and Arizona is favored by 7.5 points. And I think Baltimore is one of those teams that basically either has to accept the fact that they're not going to make the playoffs if they lose this game, or play like their lives depend on this game, which it kind of does. It's at Arizona. Arizona tends to play extremely well at home. I believe they're going to get the win. Now, I do believe Baltimore will cover this spread, but it's very questionable. I wouldn't bet on it. It's a Monday night game, so the pressure's going to be on. We know how Joe Flacco is in high-pressure situations. He delivers more times than not. So, I mean, when you look at the last time that Baltimore played the Steelers on, I believe it was Thursday night, but I could be wrong. Could have been a Monday night as well. But either way, if you look at that game, they performed extremely well. So, when Baltimore is on the stage, I believe they perform at a high level. I think they're going to cover this spread, but that's about it. I don't believe they win the game against Arizona. Arizona has proven to be a ridiculously tough team, and a ridiculously tough team at home, like even more so. So that does it for NFL talk. Let's take a break, and we'll be back with soccer to finish off. Hello and welcome back to the Dyclif Dygest. Real quick, let's just discuss some interesting transfer news that we have going on right now, and that is Eden Hazard has been linked to several teams now. I don't know. It just came out of nowhere. Basically, I believe his agent is requesting Eden Hazard to depart from Chelsea in the next transfer window, and this is kind of interesting because if Chelsea doesn't make Champions League next year, then it's going to be kind of difficult for these players to return to Chelsea and continue wanting to play for Chelsea. So we might be seeing Chelsea just completely get stripped of some of their higher quality players. Now, to where exactly Hazard would go is up in the air because, I mean, you have Real Madrid that's up there, PSG, possibly Bayern Munich. I have no idea. Some team that can afford him. I don't know if he'll go to another Premier League team. That's another thing that's still there. But I'm not even sure if this is going to happen. But the more and more you dig into a story, the more and more it seems to be true simply because of how Chelsea's performed this season. It would be a little bit different if Chelsea was maybe top 8, but they're not. So I could see the frustrations, but at the same time, I think he's going to stick it out, see what happens this season. If they don't make Champions League or a top 4 finish in the BPL, I don't think Eden Hazard will stay. So, speaking of Champions League, I'm going to wrap the show up after I talk about this. But we're halfway through Champions League group stages, and the group stages go something like this. Group A, we have Real Madrid with 7 points, PSG with 7, Malmo and Shakhtar with 3-0. Really, there's no way that Real Madrid and PSG don't go through from this group. So let's just move on to the next one. Group B, we have Wolfsburg with 6, Manchester United with 4, CSKA Moscow with 4, and PSV with 3. This is one of the more interesting groups there is, because those 4 teams are very high quality teams, and I'm expecting Wolfsburg and United to move on. But then again, weirder things have happened, and CSKA Moscow is currently tied with Manchester United, but I believe that United has a side that can definitely put forward a top 2 finish in this group and move forward. Next, we have Group C. Currently on top of this group right now is Benfica with 6, Atletico Madrid with 6, Galatasaray with 4, and FC Astana with 1. And really, I see Atletico Madrid moving on, and either Galatasaray or Benfica. Benfica's been playing extremely well. I don't know if they'll be able to keep it up, but they seem to put forth a lot of effort in Champions League, so I believe that they move on to the next round. Group D, we have Juventus with 7, Manchester City with 6, Sevilla with 3, and Borussia Mönchengladbach with 1. I see Juventus and Man City moving on. Those are the 2 obvious teams. Juventus actually made it to, I believe, the finals last year. So, yeah, the finals. Actually made it to the finals. So they're moving through. Manchester City, sitting near the top of the Premier League table. I don't think you can ignore that. I have them moving through as well. Group E, we have Barcelona with 7, Bayern Leverkusen with 4, BATE, I don't know if it's pronounced Bate or BATE, Borisov. And then we have AS Roma sitting with 2, and Borisov has 3, by the way. So I see Barcelona and Bayern Leverkusen moving through in this group simply because Roma has not shown up at all and actually has a -1 goal differential right now. And somehow you have Borisov, who has more points right now than them. But it's really difficult to say. But I say Bayer Leverkusen simply because of the addition of Javier Hernandez, or Chicharito, as some people call him. He's been a really great player for them, and I expect more from the future from them as well. And it's hard to say when Lionel Messi's going to come back, but Barcelona seems to be getting on just fine without him for the moment in Champions League. Now we go into Group F. We have Bayern Munich with 6, Olympiacos with 6, Dynamo Zagreb with 3, and Arsenal with 3. So Arsenal recently got a crucial win against Bayern Munich, which got them the 3 points, and that's why that this table's a little bit mixed up. But I'm going to say Bayern Munich and Arsenal move through. Even though Arsenal is technically dead last right now in this group, they're just too good for this to happen. They have to move through. Like, they have to. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is where Arsene Wenger has to perform. And that's simply put. So, I believe those 2 will come out of this group alive. Group G, we have FC Porto, Dynamo Kiev, Chelsea, and I'm sorry if I butcher this, Maccabi Tel Aviv. So Porto with 7, Dynamo Kiev with 5, Chelsea with 4, and whatever that team I just said with 0. They have a goal differential -8. So basically, let's just not even include them in this group. I'm going to say FC Porto and Chelsea move through, even though somehow Dynamo Kiev is currently moving through. Chelsea basically have to get it together in all aspects. You figured Champions League would be a little bit better than the Premier League for them. I don't know if it's what side they're putting for. I don't know what necessarily is going on. I haven't watched them enough to really analyze what they're about. But I still believe they move forward and find a way. But I don't know how much longer they have. Group H is interesting. We have Zenit with 9, Valencia with 6, KAA Gent or Ghent, I don't know how to pronounce that necessarily, with 1, and Lyon with 1. So Olympic Lyon from League 1 or Ligue 1 has 1. That's kind of ridiculous if you ask me. That's a pun and a half. I would have said that Zenit and Lyon would move forward from this group, but Valencia now is 6. It's hard for me to see Olympic Lyon move forward, especially with Lacazette becoming more and more frustrated. So I'm still going to pick Zenit and Lyon on the simple fact that those are two that I originally said. So I'm going to stick to my guns with that one. Maybe things change over the course of the next couple games. We're only halfway through. 3 games have been played. A total of 6 has to be played to determine the 2 group winners and to see who moves on. So anyways, that's going to do it for the show. Hope you guys have enjoyed. And as always, have a nice day.